Hi, it's Nahani Rouse. Welcome back to Can We Talk, the podcast of the Jewish Women's Archive, where gender, history, and Jewish culture meet. In Upside Down Love, Sari Bashi chronicles her rocky courtship with Osama, a pseudonym for the man she eventually marries.
He loved me in each of the three languages. Ya Hilwe, Ya Habibti, Ya Omri, Ya Hubbi, Khamuda Shili, Ahuvati, love, sweetheart, Behibbek, and Yoevotach. And I tasted my love for him in all the languages and all the accents. I loved him with a force that I couldn't express in words, but I feel it so strongly now in the stream of tears flowing to form a saltwater sea he could cross to find his way back to me.
Sari and Osama struggle with the usual issues many couples deal with: communication, trust, commitment. But they face an additional challenge: trying to build a relationship across the bitter divide of the Israeli-Palestinian conflict. Upside Down Love is a love story in two voices. Chapters alternate between Osama and Sari's perspectives on their relationship and on the reality they live in. It was published in 2021 in Hebrew and came out this year in English. Sari hopes to also publish it in Arabic.
I hoped my voice would be a bridge for Israeli readers to be able to access his voice. And I was also thinking about Palestinian readers and the hope that his voice would be a window that would let them hear mine. There's a lot of dehumanizing that takes place. And, it's only gotten worse in the last 2.5 years.
Sari Bashi is a human rights lawyer, writer, and the executive director of the Public Committee Against Torture in Israel. She grew up in the United States. Her mother is American, and her father is Iraqi-Israeli. She moved to Israel in 2005 and co-founded Gisha, an Israeli NGO that aims to protect freedom of movement for Palestinians in Gaza. Upside Down Love begins in 2006, when Sari first meets Osama, and describes the tumultuous early years of their relationship. It's set between Tel Aviv, where Sari lived at the time, and Osama's home in the Palestinian city of Ramallah in the West Bank. For Sari, an Israeli Jew, traveling to and from Ramallah means navigating the complex system of the Israeli military occupation. For Osama, who is Palestinian, traveling to Tel Aviv is impossible. The Israeli army, citing security concerns, forbids Palestinians from entering Israel, except in rare cases. In this episode of Can We Talk, Sari describes the physical and emotional boundaries she and Osama overcame, how living in a Palestinian city in the West Bank makes her feel more Jewish, and how she and Osama are raising their trilingual, multicultural children. Can you tell the story of how the need for freedom of movement brought you and Osama together?
Yes, and it also almost drove us apart. So I met Osama because I was his lawyer. He is originally from Gaza, and at the time I met him in 2006, the address in his Israeli-approved identification card said Gaza, although he'd been living in the West Bank for decades. And the Israeli government has a policy not to allow people from Gaza to move to the West Bank, or if they've managed to make it to the West Bank, to change their address. So for him, that meant that he, for 6 years, was pretty much trapped in the greater Ramallah area because he feared that if he tried to leave, even to go to the next town, if he crossed a checkpoint, a soldier could see the Gaza address in his ID card and remove him to Gaza by force. And he would lose his job, his son, his wife at the time, his home, everything. So he was accepted to PhD programs, both in Israel as well as in the UK, but he couldn't go because he couldn't leave. So I brought a court petition to the Israeli High Court of Justice on his behalf and was able to get him permission from the Israeli government to go to the UK for his PhD and come back to Ramallah. So it was his being trapped that brought us together. When he did come back after his PhD, he'd separated from his wife and we fell in love. So we met as lawyer and client, But then what became hard was when we became more than that, for him to not be free and love somebody who was free. In the book, I write about going to swim in the sea, something that he really longed for, and then not knowing, can I tell him that? Will he enjoy that? Will it make him feel badly? Will it emphasize the distance between us?
And there's a certain power dynamic that comes into play, I imagine, when you're able to move around, come to him, leave, come back, and he's not free to do that.
Overwhelming. I mean, there's a part in the book, it's a little bit funny, but it says something where he's broken up with me yet again, and then, apologized and wants me to come back yet again. And I was having none of it. I was done. And the only way we could see each other is when I came to Ramallah. He couldn't come to Tel Aviv. But I wasn't going to come because I was angry at him. And so he hatches a scheme to try to get a fake medical report so we can try to ask for a humanitarian permit to come to Tel Aviv and tell me he's sorry. So it's funny, but there's also a reality there that he could never come to me. I could come to him whenever I wanted. And that played out, and actually still plays out, in a million different ways. And when we were first getting to know each other, it was really hard. Because, as lovers, you want to feel close, but at every turn, the outside world is just pulling you in different directions and highlighting the differences between you.
As you were getting to know each other and as you were spending more and more time in Ramallah, were there gender expectations outside of your relationship with Osama, but in the wider culture that you had to adjust to?
So I think the gender expectations made it a little bit easier for me because I think that in general, it's not unique to Palestine, but in general, most societies tend to find women less threatening. And so particularly under circumstances where Jewishness or Israeliness is associated with violence and threat, being a woman just makes it easier in many ways. And I can pass in lots of different ways as well.
What do you mean by pass?
Well, I mean, the way that there are parts of the West Bank that are for Jews only and parts that are expected to be for Palestinians only. And I have to be able to move through those different areas in order to live my life. And so I pass. I mean, my physical looks allow me to do that. The fact that I'm a woman means that, soldiers are less likely to scrutinize my ID or search my car because I'm just less threatening. And in circumstances where Palestinians could be afraid of a woman, afraid of an Israeli, a woman is just less threatening. So in that sense, it's easier. I think also in terms of the taboos on the Palestinian side, so there's an assumption that a woman's identity is subsumed by her husband. And there's an assumption that a woman's identity matters a little bit less. And that also makes it easier for our kids as well. Because it means that, they actually have both of our last names, but it means that in terms of the way that they're perceived by society, they can be accepted as Palestinian, which is important if you're in a Palestinian school, for example.
Mm-hmm. So I definitely want to ask you more about your kids, but first, getting back to the book. It's a very interesting way of telling a love story that's also in some ways reads like a dual narrative approach to the conflict because you have your perspective and his. Did you think about it that way?
My hope is that every character in the book is written as a human being. Because I think that there's a lot of demonization and a lot of attempts to write off what's happening in Israel-Palestine as some kind of biblically ordained ethnic or tribalistic struggle. And that's not how I see it. I think that everybody here is a human being. There's a system of oppression, a racialized hierarchy that is assigning different people different roles. And that doesn't absolve anybody of personal responsibility for the roles they play. But it also means the solution is not let's make peace and get along. It's let's transform this system into a just one.
In the book, you describe your journeys from Ramallah to Tel Aviv when you're living in Ramallah and still working in Tel Aviv, and you're crossing this seam line repeatedly. Back then, 15 or 20 years ago, during the time of the book, what was that journey like for you? I mean, partly logistically, but also emotionally.
Much easier than it is now.
Tell me about that, because I know that things have drastically changed.
Yeah, I mean, things have gotten really hard. If you haven't been to the West Bank lately, what started out as, one or two or three or 20 checkpoints really became a system where every Palestinian town or city or village is enclosed by an iron gate, yellow or orange, that's either open or closed, and more often than not closed. So, you may have to drive like 30 miles north in order to go 20 miles south, because the main roads are closed off, except in a very few number of places where you have to go through a checkpoint. So it's hard. It's really hard, and time consuming. During the time of the book, which was, I guess, 2006 to 2014, it was easier. You still had to go through checkpoints, and I think what was really stunning was just the difference. So you would leave, poorly kept roads surrounded by barbed wire and concrete walls, and travel routes that had been deliberately turned into choke points. So every road is closed except for one, and so you have traffic from 6 different urban centers converging on a single lane. So people become aggressive, and it can be soul killing. And then you reach a road that's common to Palestinians and settlers, or settlers only, or Israelis only, and it's great. Everything is nicely paved, and it's the difference between a government that is designing everything to work beautifully for a primarily Jewish citizenry. You enter this lovely place that is built to be lovely for people. And then you're coming from this place that is built to be horrible for another set of people.
What was it like for you as a Jewish Israeli woman crossing that boundary?
I think it was mostly just very confusing and disorienting, and still is. And I think it's maybe heightened my feeling of not belonging anywhere, of being sort of extraterritorial. I don't really feel like I belong in Israel, although I'm more comfortable there, in the sense that, like, the few times that Osama's gotten a permit, and he's seen me interact, almost every time he says, "You're so confident," because he's used to seeing me, and my Arabic is not great. And so when I'm like trying to talk to a shopkeeper or whatever, I'm deferential, I'm a little unsure, I'm aware of being an outsider. And then there's a place where, at least at a basic level, I'm an insider. And so it's more comfortable, it's more familiar. I know how things work, I know the language well, but I don't know that I actually fit there anymore. Maybe because I've spent so much time on the other side, kind of seeing what life is like. I mean, it's a racialized hierarchy, and so I can pass between those identities. I get stopped at the same checkpoint as Palestinians, but then I make it through, and then I'm part of the privileged class. So it certainly changes the way you feel about that privileged class.
Does it change the way you feel about your own identity?
I think I've given up on trying to, define my identity. It's something that I actually think about a lot, because it's become more important for my kids as they get older. They're trying to figure out their identity or forge it, and who I am, my identity as a Jew is not the easiest one for them to manage. So I would say that living in the West Bank does make me feel much more solidly Jewish, in the sense that I think it's what defines me vis-a-vis others. So in the West Bank, when people speak in Arabic, the word they use for Israelis, including the Israeli army, and especially the Israeli army, is the Jews. And so, and when I want to explain to people who I am, I'll say either I'll say I'm Jewish, or sometimes if I want to be more gentle, I'll say I'm from your cousins, your uncle's children.
And people understand what you mean by that?
Yeah, it's the kind of the biblical idea of like Muslims and Jews coming from the two sons of Abraham.
One thing that comes across very strongly in the book is how the political situation between Israelis and Palestinians, the conflict, the occupation, is very present in your relationship. Can you talk about some of the times when it was hardest for your relationship to transcend that?
Yeah. So there's a chapter in the book about a hike to a river in the southern part of the West Bank. And it was a hike that I insisted on, maybe naively, because I knew how much he loved the sea and he couldn't go to the sea, and there were beautiful waterfalls there. And so I insisted we were going to go and we were going to swim and it was going to be great and we were going to just shut out the occupation. And I told him, I said, we may see settlers with guns. They're not invited. We're going to have fun.
Let's hear an excerpt.
When we reached the first pool, small, shallow, but bursting with cold water from a waterfall, Osama jumped in and knelt, splashing water everywhere, laughing like a child and shouting in celebration. Graceful lizards darted among the rocks, their tan color partially camouflaging them. My heart filled with joy, as if our simple and common love for water were stripping away the layers of difference between us.
But then as the path became more crowded, including by armed Jewish men, it just emphasized the differences between us. In particular, when he saw how easily I spoke with them. And there was a realization that I would be the one to protect us with my language, with my identity that was common to the people who terrified him. And that almost drove us apart.
Mm-hmm. Because it didn't feel so unusual for you to see Jewish men hiking with guns.
Right.
And for him, it was very threatening.
It was threatening. It wasn't unfamiliar to either of us, but it was so clear that he was terrified. I mean, I talked to them partly to keep us safe, but, it drove a wedge. And also for him, hearing Hebrew, which was a language that he'd come to associate with Israeli soldiers, including, soldiers who detained and tortured him. And then for him to hear it in the mouth of the woman he loved was hard. In the beginning of any relationship, any new relationship, it's so fragile. You're just trying to get to know each other. You're just trying to find ways to be close. And then you have no less than a decades-long occupation with lots of men with guns pulling you apart, right? It's not easy. It's really not easy.
Yeah. And you made it.
We did. So far, so good.
So how were you able to do that eventually? Was there something that got put aside? How would you describe how you... I mean, the USA Today blurb, or is this your publisher's blurb? I don't know. It says that it's a love that transcends all division. And when I read that, I thought, I wonder if that's the way Sari would describe it.
I don't know if it'll sell books, of course. Look, I think that one thing that helped is that he and I are both outsiders by nature. And so to some extent, we had less to lose. And I think that was really important. And also that our families were far away. So those pressures, and his family wasn't far away. They're in Gaza. It's 50 miles away, but we can never go there and they can never come here. So it might as well be the other side of the moon. And my family in Tel Aviv wouldn't come. And some of my family's in the US. So it just meant that we actually had more space to interact as individuals with fewer pressures on us. I do think that we just had a really strong love. Some kinds of love are just strong. And maybe we made so many mistakes early on. I think we made all of our mistakes in the beginning. We were so bad at communicating that, we actually learned a lot by getting it wrong in the beginning.
By the way, your shared language is English?
Yeah, we speak to each other in English.
Speaking of communication?
Yeah, so we speak to each other in English. I speak to the kids in Hebrew. He speaks to them in Arabic. And the language they use to answer us, changes with time and location.
How did you agree that that would be the way you do it? I mean, you mentioned that Hebrew for Osama was very, was difficult. So when did you have a discussion about language and the place that Hebrew might have in your family?
I don't think we did. Our daughter came early. She was the first, and she came early. So there were a lot of decisions we didn't have time to make. And what happened was she was born in an Israeli hospital, and then she was hospitalized for a month. And he couldn't come. In general, Palestinians are not able to enter Israel. So I spent a month with her in the hospital, and I spoke to her in Hebrew, and it just felt natural. It was also a Hebrew-speaking environment. And then when I took her home, I remember, our friends were like really excited to see the new baby. They'd been waiting a month. And so, pretty early on, they came over and she was sleeping. And then she woke up, and I came over to her and picked her up. And then I said in the tones that, mothers use to speak to newborns, like, "Oh, sweetheart, I'll give you some milk, don't cry," tenderly in Hebrew. And as soon as I opened my mouth to speak, our friends sitting on the couch, they froze when they heard the Hebrew. And then there was a beat, and then they laughed. They had never heard Hebrew spoken with tenderness. And the laugh, I think, was like, oh yeah, it's just a language, because it was a language they'd associated with violence. And, I think when she was small, I spent a lot of time with her alone, as you do with a baby. And so it was okay, it was usually just us. And then I think as she got older and as her brother joined us, I think it became something else. I think it became, I didn't want to hide who I am because I didn't want them to be ashamed. And it also just felt like, I had to make my way here in the West Bank. It's not easy. And just the way that I chose to do it was to, where there wasn't a security risk, to just try to gently let people know who I am.
What do you mean by a security risk?
In the West Bank, Palestinians associate Hebrew with Israelis, which they associate with settlers and soldiers, but I'm unlikely to be mistaken for a soldier. So there are many instances of Jewish settlers entering Palestinian villages and behaving aggressively, violently, or even using lethal force. So for all those reasons, I really don't want to be mistaken as a settler. And being mistaken as a settler could be dangerous to me, because if people feel threatened, then they could also respond in ways that would be dangerous to me.
Your book tells the story of you and Osama meeting, falling in love, breaking up, ultimately deciding to be together and raise a family. And the narrative ends with the birth of your first child. So why did you decide to end it there? I wanted to hear more.
I think that was kind of the end point of the love story, because I think once she was born, it was like all of the, should we do this, should we not do this, just went away. Look, people can get divorced. It's having a kid doesn't mean you're still together. But I think there was a lot of anguish over, are we going to do this? Or are we not going to do this? And then when she was there, it's like, okay, I guess we're doing this. So that was really the end point of it, when, we kind of just became a family.
Right. It was like the answer to the question that you kept asking throughout the entire book.
Yeah, she answered it for us.
How old is she now?
She's almost 12. And
have you continued to speak Hebrew with her?
Yes, but now she will sometimes pretend not to understand me, and that's by the way common in lots of places where there's a parent who doesn't speak the dominant language, where the kids will just want to fit in, just want the parent to speak the dominant language.
Is that out in public, or is that also at home?
Also at home. It's usually at home that she does it, but I insist.
You also speak Hebrew with her in public.
I do, but I'm I have situational awareness, so it's not neutral. I do exercise some judgment, but yes, I do. And that's another place where being a woman makes it a little bit easier, because it's just a little bit less threatening for people.
How do people respond to you, people that don't know you?
I think sometimes it makes people nervous. And I'm very careful in villages, because in villages people hear a lot of Hebrew from settlers, and they often don't mean well. And so it can actually be dangerous for everybody. But I do want to think that there's a potential for something transformative, in the sense that it's a beautiful language. And the fact that soldiers use it to abuse people at checkpoints, it's not the fault of the language. And I would say the same thing for Judaism. The fact that the Israeli government claims to be doing all kinds of horrible things in the name of all Jews, that's them, and that's wrong. And so, part of what I think what I'm trying to do in a, carefully and in a gentle way is, suggest that Hebrew and Judaism are part of a beautiful cultural tradition. And the fact that they're being abused and misused by an oppressive government doesn't take away their value. There was a time when I was visiting Osama for my Passover holiday, and I brought some matzah. And so his friend comes in and sees it on the kitchen counter and says, "Oh, I remember those from prison. We used to put chocolate spread on them." I was like, "Oh, great." My holiday food reminds him of Israeli prison. It's fabulous.
It is the bread of affliction.
It is the bread of affliction. So he was afflicted, definitely. But there was another time, just a few years ago, when Passover came out around Ramadan. And so we had a Passover Seder that was also an iftar, or breaking of the fast. And so we had our Muslim friends and neighbors come. And, I'm always careful in sharing my traditions with people, because I know that they can be associated with violence. But at the same time, I also want people to see that actually a Passover Seder is a 1,000-year-old tradition that has nothing to do with the Israeli government.
And how did that blended iftar Seder go?
It went really well, especially because I got everybody, all the kids, afikoman presents, like the presents that you get for finding the matzah at the end. So the other kids were thrilled, because this was totally unexpected.
How did you decide to stay and raise your family there, as opposed to, I don't know, going out of the region?
I don't think we've decided. I think that I certainly have always wanted to stay, in the sense that I want to fight. I'm angry at the kind of oppression that's taking place here. And, I spend my professional and political life resisting it. And, particularly in the last couple of years, so many people are leaving. And so I want to stay and fight, but I also have a lot of privilege that Osama does not have. And so, I defer to him on if it gets too much, either for him or the kids. I think if we thought that we needed to move for our kids, then we would try to do that.
What are your hopes for your children's future in terms of their identity and religious practice, cultural identification?
I think that's something they have to decide, because right now it's very fraught. Growing up as, mixed Jewish Palestinian kids and kind of the pressure cooker of the West Bank is not a very open environment. And I guess I hope that, as they get older, they'll be able to find more space to be able to explore the different parts of their identity with more freedom. Our kids are exposed to a lot. Kids here are. And I worry sometimes that I'm not doing enough to protect them. And I'm also always looking for ways to support them as they hopefully become resilient. And I do think that they live in many, many worlds. They're constantly code switching. And I do think it's a strength And, I hope it makes them more empathetic, just being able to see so many different kinds of people and fit in so many different kinds of places.
Sari and her husband have friends and family all over Israel and Gaza. She says the past 2.5 years have been extremely difficult. Most of Osama's family is still in Gaza. Most of them have had their homes destroyed, and some are still living in tents. Osama's nieces and a nephew were offered scholarships at universities abroad, but they've not been able to get out of Gaza. Sari says the young people feel like they have no horizons. Sari Bashi is a human rights lawyer and the author of Upside Down Love. She lives in the West Bank with her husband and their 2 children. Thank you for joining us for Can We Talk, the podcast of the Jewish Women's Archive. Our team includes Jen Richler and Judith Rosenbaum. Our theme music is by Girls in Trouble. You can find Can We Talk online at jwa.org/canwetalk or wherever you get your podcasts. I'm Nahani Rouse. Until next time.